Hi, everyone, and welcome to Innovation Insider, where we delve into the minds of visionaries shaping the future of complex organisations. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Tracey Newman. Tracey and I had the pleasure of working together a number of years ago for Australia's largest insurer, where we both shared a passion for customer-centred design. She was actually my coach when I first completed human-centred design training, and her expertise was instrumental in shaping my approach to innovation. Tracey brings a wealth of experience in team transformation, client engagement, and innovation. As a director at Impacto Consulting, she leads efforts to modernise and drive impactful innovation within the social sector, particularly in aged care and disability services. She's also a recognised voice in the industry, contributing to platforms like Pro Bono Australian News and Third Sector News, and speaking at events such as the Change the World conferences. Tracey's collaborations extend to UN Women Australia, RACV's Community Foundation, and various state governments, demonstrating her commitment to making a positive social impact. I'm excited to dive into her journey, her insights on innovation, and the incredible work she's leading today. Tracey, thanks for joining us.
So welcome. Nice to be here.
Great to have you here today. We're going to dive straight into it and talk about innovation secrets. So you've got a host of experience across a number of industries and organisations, and I'd be keen to unpack and unlock some of your believed secrets to successful innovation.
I've got to say, my secrets are not really secrets. They're probably the things that everyone will go, yeah, of course. But really, collaboration, don't try and do this on your own, because it's really hard, and it's take people on the journey with you. Empathy, absolutely, and particularly when you're working in the sector that we are, but really anywhere. I mean, if you're not open to talking to people, learning from people, listening to people, again, it just makes everything in innovation a lot harder than it needs to be. And of course, adaptability. Whatever you think is going to happen is probably not what actually happens. So the ability to just be able to roll with it and discover new ways of doing things is kind of the whole purpose of innovation, really, isn't it? So yeah,
absolutely.
I think is a secret. It's just the same stuff that you hear over and over and over again, but it really actually is what makes the difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's something in that, though, because we can overcomplicate it sometimes. But if you do bring it back to its essence, we do hear a lot around collaboration, empathy. Adaptability is a really good one that I thought you've introduced there that I've probably heard a little bit less about in this podcast. And maybe we can dive a little bit into that, because like you said, what you think is the solution or what you think the answer is going to be, it's not. It's just not. Like most of the time, it's not. I don't know if you've got, and I'm just going to pivot slightly here, and if you've got some examples of either where you've done work or where you've seen examples of this. And a lot of people wouldn't know there is actually some really famous examples of adaptability where you might start with a particular audience or a proposition or an idea or a revenue model or whatever it might be. And you had such strong beliefs that it was the thing. And then as soon as you test it or you put something in market or whatever it is, the market tells you otherwise and you've got to adapt. But there's a lot of very, very successful ventures in history that have actually, only because they've had that ability to adapt. It's very, very rare that first time is the one that succeeds.
I was actually hearing about Wrigley's. So they started off, what was it? They were selling like saucepans or some ridiculous thing. And then they gave away free with people who bought that some baking powder, because that was really popular at the time, and it was cheap. And then they identified another opportunity, which was gum. And they actually had these 2 flavors of gum that they gave with people as a gift with purchase. And that actually became the reason why people were buying their items. And, Wrigley, Juicy Fruit. I mean, I've only ever known them as a chewing gum organisation, but they actually started with something totally different. It's not saucepans, but it's something completely as unrelated to chewing gum as you can get.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, they never got it. They never would have been bought by Mars if they were a sourcement company. I can almost guarantee that. Another great example that I've just thought of is, do you know the origin story of 3M?
Oh, no, I don't.
So 3M, one of the most famous innovative companies in the world. Sticky Notes is probably the famous one. They've got,
yeah,
I think they innovate a product a day. The 3Ms, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe they were the names of 3 mines. They were a mining company. When they first began, it was either the name of 3 cities or 3 mines.
Yep.
That was where they started. You think about what they do now compared to like a mining company, like that is adaptation on steroids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
And then, there's always the millions of examples that everyone can think of where organizations maybe were adaptable and then got bad at adaptation and now don't exist. Kodak, great example. They actually led the transition between black and white film processing to color. So, thought they were great at adaptation and innovation, and then digital cameras came along and they went, oh, we'll just sit this one out. Oops.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
Yeah, in hindsight, not such a great idea. Okay, so then I've just written down your 3 not so secret secrets of innovation, being collaboration, empathy, and adaptability. If I change the order of those, it spells ACE. So I think that's a really ACE platform that you've got there, or framework of innovation you've got there, is a good, easy one to remember: adaptability, collaboration, and empathy. So if they're the things that companies and people need to get right, to the fundamentals of innovation, then what is getting in the way? What is stopping this happening in all organizations?
In all organizations, I think there's I've got a list. One of them is the idea that innovation is a nice to have, and I'll get to it when I've got some spare time and resources, which is a bit like waiting until you've got lots of money and too much time before you have children, right? Like that day never comes. You never have too much time and too much money. You just need to go, okay, well, this is what we need to do, and really, innovation is one of those things that does create the adaptability, which then means it guarantees you long-term survival. So I think that's one of the things is really waiting for the perfect time and place before you get started. I guess other barriers are just that so busy day to day, putting out fires, don't get the opportunity to sort of go to the source and figure out where they're starting and what's carrying that. In the social sector, we see also there's and I get it, like the organizations we work with are supporting sometimes quite vulnerable people. So the idea of experimentation and trialing things like that, that's a really tricky one. And so that whole being unsure where to start and how to practice your skills in a way that isn't putting vulnerable communities at risk is another barrier I see. And of course, time, money. How's my list going?
Yeah, no, really good. I really like the discretionary innovation piece at the beginning. Very much something that has been seen across a lot of sectors at the moment with the cost of living crisis that we are in, is that, and it's not uncommon in downward economic cycles. You do see functions such as marketing, innovation tend to become constrained. The belt gets tightened. They seem to be some of the first things to go. Whereas, I mean, theoretically, and it's very easy to look on the outside and say, this is actually the time when you can genuinely make a difference. You can actually have an impact. You can outgrow your competitors. You can genuinely do something here, but it's probably the hardest time to actually do that. But I like your idea of the excuse me, of the analogy with the having a baby. It was nothing hit home any more than that. You're right. You're never ready. You're never ready financially or emotionally or whatever it might be. But you've just, it's one of those things that you just do it, and then you wonder how you kind of got away without doing it beforehand.
That's right.
So then talking about some of the differences, you've spent a lot of time, particularly in the last decade, in the NFP sector and working with vulnerable communities and lots of purpose-driven, mission-driven organisations. You've also spent time working with for-profit organisations in corporate Australia. I'm keen to understand in your lived experience, what you've seen as the differences in innovation in those organisations.
The client and how important it is, and how the not-for-profit sector has this real focus on making sure that they're supporting people. So the risk is higher if you don't get it right. So I guess that is the primary thing that we see, is that mindset around, making sure that you're taking care of people at the same time as innovating. Whereas if you're looking to sell a product and you sell less of them, the risk is not quite at the same level. So that's definitely one of the big differences that we see. And I get, conversely, the advantage in terms of the not-for-profits is they have this amazing relationship and opportunity to leverage the community and the support that they get from the people that they're working with, and the rest of the community as well. So, they've certainly got benefits as well as constraints. And I think again, what we see from the thinking behind running innovative projects or becoming an innovative organisation is your not-for-profits are very, wanting to be really mindful of their resources and their resourcing. They don't see it as kind of their money. They see it as being the community's money, and they want to be really smart about how they spend that. Whereas, again, I think there's a little bit more propensity for a corporate to take a risk. Of course, they're mindful of their shareholders and mindful of returns and things like that, but it's just a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good insight there around just that mindset of how the money is spent, because, like you said, you tend to find NFPs that never treat it as though they're their own money. And in corporate, not necessarily the case either, but the relationship with shareholders is so distant, perhaps, in a for-profit or a public company. In an NFP, this is money that's been generally donated by individuals, corporations. It's a discretionary expense put towards a greater good. So there is a certain responsibility that comes with spending that money that does come with a different intent, I guess, to shareholders' money, to give them a financial return.
Yeah, I mean, they still see the benefits and will look for those benefits and understand the importance of being able to run these kinds of projects and work in this way. It's just that there's that extra layer, I think, of responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah, wonderful. So then, staying on the NFP roots, and maybe talking about industry changes. So you've spent a lot of time working with aged care organisations, with disability services, both enormous areas of growth and certainly areas that we're expecting to see into the future for Australia as key health challenges, key cost challenges for government and for governments. There's an enormous amount of funding and resourcing that's going to need to be put towards those. We've seen through NDIS, we've seen through aging population, all sorts of kind of drivers there. I'm keen to understand how you stay ahead of these changes. If you're an NFP or if you're an organisation working in this space, they are dynamic, they are growing spaces. How do you stay ahead? And they are heavily regulated spaces often as well. How are people staying ahead here?
And that's one of the reasons why we're actually finding that there is a lot of interest in our work at the moment, particularly within the aged care sector. And a lot of it actually comes from they know that there's changes coming and they don't always have the detail of those. So it's about the organisation being prepared so that they can adapt quickly. And you really need to have all of your people aligned, have them be confident in their ability to navigate unknown situations when you know change is coming and you don't know exactly what that is, because you're not in a position that you can, implement it, but you know that it's coming, and you know that you may not get the time that you would like to be able to implement it. And yeah, a lot of these changes are complex in nature. There's multiple different pages and levels, and the stakes are high. These organizations really want to get it right. So the best way that I see my clients able to navigate these changes is by taking their people on a journey to be able to be adaptable and to be able to be flexible in their approach and feel supported to make change and make it happen well. In terms of us, we actually do the same thing. We dedicate time every single week, even though it feels sometimes like a luxury we can't afford, to just learning and to listening and talking to people and having conversations and following people in unrelated industries that are doing things that are interesting, and thinking about how we can incorporate that into our practice and the way that we work.
Okay. And I guess that's critically important for you. If you've got other organizations who are relying on you as that voice and that level of authority and expertise, then you've got to have your ear to the ground. You've got to know what's happening and what's changing. But it's interesting, just listening to what you were saying, it sounds like this is inherent in I guess, one of the qualities that I love about you, and having worked with you in the past, is that pure empathy and just your ability to listen and understand is incredibly valuable, to not only understand some of the challenges that we can help you with now, but also in the future as well. I think is a really critical skill of yours.
Thank you. I think, I guess, to sort of reflect on that, I also need to be really mindful that it's not up to me to be an expert on those changes because I am speaking to people who are who've been working in this industry for 30 years. They can read those changes and they have a level of comprehension and understanding about how that's going to integrate into their own organization that's well beyond anything that I have. But that's not the value that I add. The value that I add is on the practice of innovation and how to, embed those things within the organization. And it's through working collaboratively with the client. They're the expert on their organization and their industry, and I'm the expert on innovation, and together we create something that leverages both of those strengths.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That makes sense. So in terms of your innovation expertise, I wonder if you can share maybe your favorite or an example of innovation that you've done for an organization or for yourself that has had the most impact, or something that you've been most proud of.
Yeah, and the reason why I point that out is because I need to remind myself that I'm not there to be an expert, because so often people will come to me and we'll be talking about a challenge and I'll be thinking, I've had no idea how to solve that. Which is the perfect segue into one of my favorite innovation stories. So we did some work with the Continence Foundation, and what they wanted to do was create a communication with their community that didn't rely on language, that would enable people to sort of understand, well, what are the symptoms of incontinence, and that there was an opportunity for them to get help. So we were working with the team who were responsible for communications and dissemination of information. And whilst they were able to have, some of their materials translated into different languages, there are multiple different languages spoken right across Australia. And even, and it's not just about people not understanding the English language. Some people's language comprehension isn't quite there. So they wanted to create something that would be far more accessible to a broader range of people. So, looking at that going, well, I've got no idea how to do that. Really, no idea. However, we co-designed that with the community, and we were able to come up with 3 different videos that were animated. So, and they all told different stories of real life experiences that were amalgamation of the different people sharing their stories. And it was actually just released this year, so in line with World Continence Week. So they've had over 200 1,000 views. They've got some really beautiful feedback. Like even, you know, people sort of sharing the feedback like, wow, I see that in me. I've had that experience. And even down to the characters that they used. So we were trying to come up with a character that was non-gendered, that had no discernible kind of demographics attached to them, so that anybody who was watching this character could potentially see themselves. So trying to come up with a character that doesn't obviously have an age or look a certain way was really difficult. And it was only through talking to, again, the co-design community, one of them said, well, why don't we use a bladder? And so the main character is actually a bladder. And nice. It was, yeah, just really clever. I mean, the community, like so many, you put together a group of people and that shared lived experience and mindset, what they can bring to that conversation and what they can apply is so much better than anything that I would have been able to come up with.
What a great example. And speaking of lived experience, I know you are an advocate for lived experience in using it for decision making, using it for innovation. I'm keen to maybe unpack that a little bit in terms of, you might have some specific tips or tactics that you use or have used around what lived experience can mean and the impact that it can have. I mean, you've just given a great example, but perhaps you've got some other specific kind of tips around, or why lived experience is so important for design.
I look at lived experience as being expertise. So if you were going to create something, you wouldn't not include experts in that conversation. People with lived experience have expertise. They are the experts. So but I mean, the perspective that I have is that it's like any expertise. So you would resource it. You wouldn't expect, you know, a doctor to come and share their medical knowledge without expecting to acknowledge them for that expertise that they're bringing into that conversation. And again, you wouldn't try and create something without their input either, if it were something that related to a medical field. So I think having that view and thinking of lived experience as expertise is really important. And I think the other thing that's helpful is to understand that people are pragmatic. And I think sometimes there's a perception, if you want to meaningfully include lived experience, that you've got to make sure that it's a totally unconstrained environment. Whereas it's very rare. I've never come across a situation you might have that you have the opportunity to create something in a totally unconstrained environment. That just doesn't happen. And people don't expect that. But what they do expect is that you're going to be upfront and share with them what is possible and what's not possible. And so, you know, when you do that and you share those constraints and you talk to people in a way that's really, you know, respectful of their intelligence, then they're really pragmatic around, you know, what can and can't be done, and they're you know, really generous in terms of, you know, their desire to work collaboratively.
Yeah, no, I can agree with you. I definitely haven't had an experience where I've worked in a completely unconstrained environment, but it's interesting. I freaked out a little bit when you said that. I was like, unconstrained environment, that almost gives me, I mean, I love working in complexity, but I think sometimes those constraints in terms of your guardrails are actually really important when you're innovating. Is completely unconstrained. You could be completely tangential and not end up anywhere near where you started, nor where you actually need to be, or the mission that you're trying to achieve. But I think the purists would argue that you should be in a completely unconstrained environment when you are in that element of design, of creation, to be able to go where those lived experiences are. And I think you need to go where those lived experiences are, and like you say, treat that as an expert data point. But it's very difficult to. You've then got to align that back to whatever success criteria you're trying to achieve as an organization, right? Or as a company or a mission or whatever it might be. So you've still got those kind of guardrails around you to guide you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, for example, the work that we did with the Continence Foundation, we had really like quite tight constraints. We wanted to create something that didn't rely on language. Like that's quite a constraint. And we had people come, sharing ideas. We had one group, they came up and they had jingle and, they'd worked really hard on it, but it had so many references to Australian pop culture, which,
right.
it really didn't meet any of the criteria, but that was okay because we'd shared the criteria right at the very beginning and we were able to sort of circle back to that. And they had other elements as well. So we were able to elevate the elements that were within the design criteria and not use the parts that weren't. But if we didn't share those constraints with people before we started, then they could have absolutely gone off and done all sorts of things, which would have really just been kind of a waste of their time. So even when you have constraints, you've got to continue to sort of review back to them and have a look at, well, how does this thing that we've decided is important fit within the constraints that you've got? And I've got to say, it's not like, I also am very wary of that sort of whole idea of like, I'm going to show you this thing, but I've already made up my mind kind of innovation.
Yes.
And consultation and co-design, where it's like, you can design anything you like as long as it's what we've already done.
As long as it's this. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes back to that adaptability that you talked about, because I think it's completely fine to start with a hypothesis. I think there is starting with a problem and going, we've got no idea how to solve this, and here's our guardrails or our constraints. Happy with a million different ways to solve this and being okay with that. But it's also okay to be starting with a hypothesis, but you need to be really clear that it's a hypothesis. It's not exactly like you say. It can't be, okay, you're going to give us this thing at the end and it's going to look like this, and you're going to make sure that everything that you've learned along the way supports this, because that's too constraining, right? Because it's going to fail. It just does. Absolutely. We've all been there.
Yeah. We're going to keep asking people until we get the answer that we want.
Yeah, exactly. It's a Labrador approach. Yeah. Okay, so then maybe on the theme of constraints, you've collaborated with various different types of organizations, including government bodies and charities and corporates. I'm keen for your perspective on the role of cross-sector collaboration and the value that drives, or whether that is a valuable, if cross-sector collaboration is a valuable form of collaboration to drive effective results, and if it can actually work. Is it possible?
Look, I think anything is possible. I also am the eternal optimist. So, yes, I think anything is possible, and I'm also aware that there are definitely challenges to that, and sometimes it involves having a lot of goes at it. We're not. A lot of this cross-sector collaboration is new. And we're asking people to work in a different way to how they're used to working. And, sometimes we're trying to work at pace. I mean, so, it's going to take a lot of finessing, which isn't possible to do without actually doing it. So I think it's a process, and it's an ongoing process. I see that when we're talking to people about collaboration and cross-sector collaboration, there's a good desire, but there is still some work to be done around how do we make that work in a way that's effective, and so that we can progress and get those really great outcomes without that kind of becoming an industry in itself, where all we're doing is cross collaboration, but we're not actually delivering any outcomes at the end of it. So it's a work in progress would be my very short answer that I took a long time to get to.
Could you maybe just flesh that out in terms of maybe an example of what cross-sector collaboration might look like. So if you've got, let's talk about two different sectors where collaborating together could be the, you know, the 1 + 1 equals more than 2. So it could be, I guess, NFP and government. It could be government and for-profit, but it could also be across industries, right? Could have, or it could be across charity lines or whatever it might be, or whatever it might be. I'm keen to, if you've got some sort of real examples or hypothetical examples of exactly what cross-sector collaboration is.
I've got a really good example of cross-sector collaboration, and that is the Australian Alliance to End Homelessness. I think that's a really good example of collaboration because you have governments, councils, providers, and people with lived experience all working together with that end goal, where basically, their hypothesis, and it's not even a hypothesis, their belief is that homelessness is absolutely solvable, and with all of the right resources being aimed in the one direction, they've actually, we've seen some really great strides made, and also some really great examples overseas of where communities have actually ended chronic homelessness. And so, yes, homelessness can still occur, but it is short term, and it is, because I guess achieving real zero is impossible, but net zero, they've got a definition for it. And they're all working together on creating the conditions that mean that can be so. So I think that's a really good example of that sort of collaboration. But you've got the Alliance who are kind of working together with all of these different people. They've got volunteers out, understanding, well, what's actually happening in the community. They've got the list of individuals that they've spoken to understand, well, what exactly do they need? And then that's where they go to talk to government about, changes that need to be made to be able to support the work that they're doing. So it's a really great example of how that can work.
Understood. No, that is a great example. And in that particular case, it's almost as though success is entirely dependent on cross-sector collaboration.
It is.
Because each of these parties has a role to play because they exist in the system in their own way, right? And without, you take a part out, it's an ecosystem, you take a part out of that and the whole thing can fall over or the whole thing can break, right? So I think that's a really, really strong example of where cross-sector collaboration absolutely has to succeed to achieve the mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when we tackle those really complex problems in that way, we see some really great outcomes. I think there's really great examples of where that doesn't work, or where it's not even attempted. You see rhetoric in the newspaper, and it's usually political. It's usually somebody who has, some benefit from making something, look bigger and worse than what it actually is. And, there are the usual vulnerable people who are kind of made a bit of a scapegoat, and there's no sort of attempt to find a solution except for the really clever, obvious solution that fits neatly into a headline that the government can, come down hard on crime and all of a sudden it'll disappear. Because that's worked anywhere ever.
War on everything. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's a really good example. So we might then close it out and hand the mic over to you to talk about Impacto Consulting. So I know you've been working in this space for a number of years, and for me personally, you've been a wonderful mentor and guide since joining the world of consulting and boutique consulting. So I'd love to hear more about Impacto.
Yeah, well, we are consultants. We specialise in innovation. We work primarily with not-for-profit service providers, and really our focus is on creating innovative and impactful organizations. So we do that in two ways. So one way is we actually run innovation projects. We do less of that now because what we're finding is that organizations are really interested in how do we actually inbuild this into the way that we work. So instead of it being, we do a project over here and a project over here, they're actually looking at, well, how can we just embed this into how we work so that we're actually able to, instead of needing to carve out time and resources to do something, it's just how we work. So that's really where our focus is on at the moment. We also have a podcast, which is the Innovate for Impact podcast. So that's always fun to have a listen to too.
I'm a big fan. I subscribed earlier in the year and an avid listener. I think for obviously in your passion about innovation within NFP, but I think there's just, it's a weekly podcast and there's so much useful advice and reminders that actually have application well beyond NFP as well. So I would recommend for anyone who works in the innovation space to jump on to Innovate for Impact, because it is a great podcast. So finally then, I might just, if you can just tell people the easiest and best way to get in contact with you if they want to reach out and understand more about Impacto or your podcast or just you personally, what's the easiest way to get in contact?
Me personally is probably LinkedIn. So Tracey Newman, I can shoot you through the
Tracey
link.
with an E?
Tracey with an E,
yes.
yes. And
yes.
Newman, Newman, so that works. And we're also pretty active on LinkedIn under Impacto Consulting as well. So, or else there's just our website, impactoconsulting.com.au.
Excellent. Well, Tracey, thank you very much. There's a lot that I've picked up from our conversation today. Collaboration, empathy, adaptability, which I've rephrased as ACE, is just an easier one for my simple brain to remember. I think as core principles, maybe less so secrets, but like you say, core principles of innovation is very good kind of framework or base level to have and make sure they're never forgotten when you're trying to explore something new or do something a little bit different or be creative. Plenty of barriers get in the way. This idea of discretionary innovation, I thought was a really good insight, particularly in the current environment. We are seeing that certainly in the corporate sector across a number of clients who are tightening their belts on innovation, and it's a bit of a dirty word in some parts of the economy at the moment. The value of co-design, lived experience, cross-sector collaboration, plenty to unpack, and you've given us an enormous amount of insight. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful to have you on the pod, and we look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Great. Thanks, David.